What is the most paranormal thing that happened to you or anyone else? I shared this before, but it was so weird to me that it's worth mentioning. Several years ago, my husband and I were out back behind our house bird watching ducks in the pond. I decided to run up to the house to get my binoculars, which were upstairs in the house. As I entered the house through the basement, my long-deceased father's voice suddenly popped into my head saying, "Get the ones from my filing cabinet, Megs." I looked to my right to where his filing cabinet had been since his passing. The binoculars were in the second drawer. It was so weird how his voice came into my head. He even used my childhood nickname. I wasn't thinking about him at the time. Can't explain it, but it was comforting. He was a bird lover too, with better binoculars than me. Something really similar happened to me. I was traveling in India and had a fight with my then girlfriend. I stormed off to cool off and smoke a joint while I watched the sunset. I didn't realize I had been sitting only a few feet from a cobra until it started to move and slowly slither away from me. I freaked out and started half jogging back through the forest where we were staying, panicking as the ground was covered in leaves and I thought there could be snakes everywhere. All I could hear was my dad, very clearly, chastising me, calling me a fucking idiot for being so reckless and I could have been killed. I actually caught myself saying, "Okay, Dad, I'll be more careful," out loud before realizing there was no one there and he'd been dead years. I still remember hearing him say it like he was right over my shoulder. Freaked me out for days. I was 2 or 3 and remember going to my grandparents all the time. My grandfather wasn't a talker. He was quiet and kept to himself and sat in his chair all day. Sadly, Grandma ended up passing when I was 3 or 4 and I don't remember seeing my grandfather again after that. Fast forward 10 years later and my parents have my grandfather's chair in their living room. For some reason I mentioned, "Oh yeah, I remember Grandpa sitting in his chair every time we visited, but he never talked. Why was he so quiet?" My parents paused and looked at each other and said, "Well, he died before you were born." I saw my locked bedroom door open on its own one night. It was about 2 a.m. and I was on my laptop facing the door, and then heard the click of the lock and saw it open at about the same speed as someone casually opening a door to enter. I was at a sushi restaurant with my dad and suddenly his sake cup just quickly moved a few inches without making a sound. We both dismissed it and didn't say anything. Then it happened again and we asked if we both saw that. We kept moving it around and it moved back suddenly to that same spot every time. The table was dry, the floor was level. This was a week or 2 after his dad/my grandpa died. Wondered if it was him, and he made a toast with the cup. Never talked about it again. This happened to my uncle, except it was a mug for drinking tea. My uncle was a horrible man and an abuser. When he was sitting at the table snapping his fingers at my mother to get his breakfast served, the mug rose up from the table and slammed down. It shattered everywhere. My grandfather, God rest him, left the farmhouse to my father, and my uncle got the cottage on the land. My mother looked after everyone with meals. My grandfather loved my mother, his daughter-in-law, but she was more like a daughter to him. So I always think it was my grandfather telling my uncle to stop his disgusting behavior. I'll never forget the mug lifting right up and down on its own. Another time when my father was fighting with my mother, small argument, nothing major, and the curtains started to shake violently. My father told my mother it was a land tremor, but my mother was convinced it was something else. Anyway, sorry for butting in. I just want to let you know that there's others with the experience of things lifting up by themselves. I used to work in a soccer stadium that was haunted. There were numerous accounts of people hearing and seeing things that were inexplicable. One time a barmaid saw a man she didn't recognize walk around a corner. Knowing that it was a dead end and that the stadium was closed to members of the public at the time, she went over to him to see if she could help him out. But when she turned the corner, there was noon there, and nowhere they could have gone. The chef had a similar account to yours. One day, he'd turned up early to prep and warm up the kitchen. He was getting changed into his whites when he heard a voice from the doorway say, "Morning, Bob," he casually replied. "Aye, good morning," when he realized he was supposed to have been alone in the building at that time. He'd had to disarm and then rearm the security system so that he could start work. He said he didn't recognize the voice, and that when he checked the corridor there was no one there. Heard my husband yell my name angrily inside the house. My 7-year-old heard him yell /her/name and came to find me and ask if she was in trouble, and why was Dad home from work. He was not home from work. I called him to make sure. I also used to hear whispers at night like two people were on talk show radio when I was falling asleep at night. When I was in 3rd grade, I was living with my grandparents. My parents had divorced. My father remarried a woman who had kids of her own whom they both favored over my siblings and I. When my father wasn't home, his wife was abusive to his kids, never her own. She would accuse us of breaking jewelry, stealing things as justification for her discipline. My dad didn't lift a finger to stop it or defend us. When it became clear that I was on the road to a trip to the ER from her punishments, from injuries that mandated reporters could see, my fine, upstanding, church-going community member masquerading as a dad took me to my grandparents to live, making me lie in the floorboards so I wouldn't be seen. One of my teachers, Mrs. Gunner, took an interest in me and was particularly kind. She reached out to my grandparents and became a friend to all of us. One day in the lunchroom, she collapsed. I remember the other teachers laying her on a folded-up lunch table as a makeshift stretcher and carrying her out to wait for an ambulance while the students watched. My grandfather got a call later that evening saying that she had passed away. Sometime during that night she came and stood at the foot of my bed. She was wearing a white dress and was glowing. She didn't speak, she just looked at me with the most beautiful smile I've ever seen. I felt surrounded by love and peace, even knowing that she was saying goodbye and I'd never see her again. I'm now staring down the barrel of 60 years old, and I can still remember her smile, as a child who desperately needed it. Thank you, Mrs. Gunner, you made a real difference. May your crown shine brighter than the sun, beautiful lady. Till we meet again. OMG, I literally had the same experience with my grandma. I was really struggling to process it, but she came to me in a dream. She was glowing and smiling at me but didn't say anything, and I told her how beautiful she looked. After that I felt so much peace knowing she's okay. I'll never forget that. For me it was my best friend. He had suffered traumatic injuries on a Tuesday and was in the hospital on life support. I was worried and doing my best to bargain with God all week. Friday morning I got up to get ready for work. As I got out of bed I just had this thought that was more like knowing than thinking. Today's the day and everything is going to be okay. I was filled with a lightness that I hadn't known for days. I wouldn't call it happiness but peace. It was like, and he would make fun of me forever for being so corny, but it was like glittery sunlight warming my every cell. I was getting dressed and leaned over to put on stockings. I felt something wet like small raindrops hit my leg. I looked up to see if the roof had some sort of leak. It was me, I didn't even realize I was sobbing. That was when he died. I really believe he came to say goodbye. Make for the open road, Jack. We miss you. I've had several experiences over the course of the years that could be termed paranormal, for lack of a better explanation at this point. However, this location was the source of most of them. 20-some years ago, I was living near the Canadian border alone in a rented log cabin. It used to be part of a fishing resort, and had been renovated since it was built in the early part of the century. The cabin was approximately half a mile from the nearest neighbor, and 15 miles from the nearest town, so I had gotten used to isolation fairly early on. At the time, I was working PM shifts at a resort 25 miles away and wouldn't typically get home until well after midnight. On this particular night I had gotten home, put on pajamas and gone into the kitchen area to wash dishes. I was standing in front of the sink, looking out the window onto the woods when directly behind me, just above the height of my head, there was the sound of a man's whistling. Just 2 notes, and then nothing. I positively froze. I looked in the reflection of the window in front of me and saw nothing. Very quietly, I wrapped my hand around a totally inadequate knife that was in the sudsy water and turned around. Nothing there except for my 2 cats sitting by the wall looking directly into the air behind me where the whistling had come from. This kicked off many extremely odd experiences in that cabin that continued until I moved out some 6 months later. But that one was by far the most shocking just simply because it was completely unexpected. I spend a great deal of time alone in isolated locations, but since that evening I have thought long and hard about what it means to be a woman alone in the woods from a safety perspective. I live in San Francisco, and many years ago some friends bought a beautiful old Victorian house that needed a lot of work. Our friend group all pitched in on weekends and such, helping them out and when we could. In one of the rooms was a closet that had been painted shut, and when they finally got it open, it was basically just useless junk. But there was an old mirror wrapped in newspaper. The paper was from the 1970s and not contemporary with the mirror. An art historian friend said it was probably from the 1920s. It's a beautiful mirror in an oval frame with ivy carved along it. Once the house was done, all the friends that helped were invited up for dinner and the grand tour. They had hung the mirror in their bedroom, directly across from the door. When I walked in I saw my reflection and there was a woman standing behind me. Surprised, I turned around and there was nobody there. My friends looked at each other, then at me, and said, "You saw her, didn't you?" Apparently they occasionally saw the woman in the mirror. They had previously tried the mirror in their hallway, and never saw her there, but when they moved it into the bedroom, she started showing up. They said she's not always there, and not everyone who has been shown the house has seen her. They also had a dog that would walk under the mirror. She would walk into the middle of the room, but wouldn't go anywhere near where the mirror was hung. I'm not a ghost believer, but I have absolutely no idea what I saw. But I'm positive I did see her. My little sister was talking to herself downstairs. Only my mom was home, she said she was talking to the little boy. Years later my dad was installing some drywall downstairs. He kneeled in front of the TV to change the channels, and in the reflection a little boy ran behind him and he got into his karate pose because it scared him. He called out to me and my mom and realized he was home alone. He GTFO ASAP. In the same part of my basement there's a 2x3 mirror with a mountain's cape on it, and I was watching King of the Hill on that same TV and got up to go upstairs. Something caught my attention in the mirror in my peripheral vision, and something I can only describe as Rob Zombie covered in mud was staring at me in the mirror and silently yelling at me. I ran the fuck upstairs. We've all seen a shade in the hallway outside my sister's bedroom. My cousins used to sleep over as kids and they all had stories about hearing running in the hallway and cabinets slamming at night. My one cousin would wake up with scratches. He's pushing 40 and he would never even consider sleeping over here again. Around 9 p.m., was walking home passing by 2 abandoned houses which are next to each other. The houses' land are separated by a 3-foot-tall stone wall. Just as I was passing by, I saw a black cat at the back of the first house's yard, just near the wall of the house itself, run towards the wall that separates both yards, so it is actually running towards the road. It froze in place, and then suddenly dashed through the air in a straight line and landed on top on that wall. By now it looked like a heron. It's like the cat shape shifted during that little dash. It was transparent and brown in color, just like a shadow, but you could probably tell a shadow apart from that. Hard to explain, but that's what it looked like. After that, it jumped from there and changed form again. The closest thing I could find to describe it would be a pterodactyl. It rose in the air and started flapping its wings slowly as if it was gliding through the air in the direction I was walking, still was within the house's yard. It also felt like it was moving in slow motion. I'd imagine if a bird did the exact same thing, it would be moving about 5 times faster. It continued slowly flapping its wings and gliding forward till it slowly became more and more transparent, and faded away completely. This all happened in about 10 seconds. The nearest road light doesn't properly illuminate the area, and it was almost pitch black. I only saw what I saw because of the moonlight. On the day of my mom's funeral, I took a small bunch of roses wrapped in a ribbon to leave at her grave. When I got home after the funeral, the roses were tied by the ribbon to my bedroom curtains. I asked around if anyone had done that, but nobody had been in the house before I got home. It really freaked me out, but in a sweet way. We were searching for a new house when I was about 5 or 6. We found this really nice country home a few miles away from town. Reminds me of Herschel's place from The Walking Dead thinking back on it. We did a tour and I don't remember much. There was an old piano upstairs which was cool, but other than I don't think I cared for much at that age. My mother thought the design to a walkthrough was pretty, and so she had my sister, dad, her and I take a photo. This was in the early 2000s and my mom was very into scrapbooking, so she printed the pictures out at Walmart a few days later, and back at home we noticed there was someone else in the photo we didn't know. Neither of us are very superstitious or believe in that sort of thing, but it was bright as day. Behind my dad's shoulder there was a face of someone we did not know. However, that's not the creepiest part. We were moving forward with buying the house, and 2 days before we were supposed to start moving in, the house collapsed. We didn't have anything in it yet, and I'm not sure what happened financially as I was 5 at the time, but I assume we got the money back, so we were fine. Again, a few more days later, my mom's on Facebook and screams in the living room. We go see what's up and she shows us her phone. There was some guy doing last-minute repairs on the wall in the house when it collapsed with him inside and killed him. They posted a picture of him with the article. Same exact face as the guy in the photo. I experienced some minor strangeness in my first house growing up: nighttime footsteps, disembodied knocks, objects having inexplicably moved, but none of it felt menacing in any way. The first time I walked upstairs in our next house, though, I glanced over to see a woman fall flat through the room at the end of the hall, like she was skydiving from the ceiling. Just before she disappeared into the floor, she looked up, caught my eye, and flashed me a nasty smile. I'd sometimes glimpse something dark and low to the ground scampering past the doorway. It always felt like someone was standing behind me in the kitchen at night. My friends avoided sitting with their backs to the kitchen, too. Once, I heard a voice call my name from outside a second-story window when nobody else was home. The worst and weirdest thing was that whenever I took a shower, I absolutely could not shake the image of a woman severed at the waist dragging her upper torso across the bathroom floor toward me, grinning horribly as she came. It was a race to finish washing up before she could lever herself up and over the edge of the tub. Every single time. Never happened anywhere else. But the first time I showered at my college dorm, I saw some object roll next to my foot from the stall next to mine. I just stared short-sightedly at it for a second and was about to kick it back when an arm shot under the partition and grabbed it. I figured whoever was showering next to me had just panicked in the awkwardness of the situation. Then I stepped out of my stall to find, can you guess, that I was all alone in the shower room. My mom and I lived in a very haunted house. So much stuff happened I could literally write a book, but 2 instances I can briefly say. Mom and I were standing in the kitchen talking. She always kept a heavy teapot on the back burner of the stove. It flew off while we were talking at a high rate of speed at my mom's head. She ducked and it missed her and slammed into the other room. Also, I walked into my room with my cousin, and as soon as we opened the door to my dark room, we saw my blanket standing up like someone was standing under it. And then it just collapsed to the ground. She never stayed the night after that. Mom eventually had to sell the house due to so much activity. I read an account on Reddit of a young lady who had woken up one morning and thought her partner was sitting on the floor next to her bed, facing away from her, beneath a sheet which was draped over him. She smiled and said something like, "Hey you," and started stroking the top of the seated figure's head. From behind her she heard her boyfriend call from downstairs, saying something, like maybe breakfast was ready. She turned away from the figure, startled to realize that her boyfriend was downstairs. She looked back at the seated figure just in time to see the sheet gently collapse from the shape of a seated human figure to a crumpled, flat bundle of cloth on the floor. A few years ago I was visiting a few friends at the UA campus in Tucson. We had a long visit, and the night approached midnight. I decided to part ways with my friends and walk back to my hotel room. As I was making my way back, this black cat ran in front of my path, making me jump back a bit. I laughed it off and turned my gaze back to the path. That is when I saw the silhouette of a naked woman looking at me several yards away. When I tried to refocus at what I was looking at, it was a tree facing toward me, and it turned back to its original position. This freaked me out of what I just saw. Was that tree really facing me? I thought of turning back around, but I had to tell myself I was just seeing things. I made the choice just to keep walking. As I made my way through the street, it felt like things around me were watching me and were curious of me. Like shadows watching me from houses or from across the street hiding. I would sometimes hear a whisper which would send chills down my spine. I tried not to panic as I made my way back to my room. The atmosphere around me felt like I was in Halloween Town from Nightmare Before Christmas. Once I reached the hotel, the air shifted back to normal. It was spooky and creepy, but it wasn't as scary as one would think. When I got back to my hotel room, I went to bed still at awe of what I just witnessed. Did I really just see what I saw? Was that real? Once morning came about, I met up with my friends for breakfast and told them what I experienced. They poked fun at me, saying I was probably smoking weed or was drunk. After the teasing and giggling stopped, one of my friends told me that Tucson was known to be an outlaw town, meaning a lot of people were killed due to no laws during the early days. He said most likely I saw those spirits still wandering around the city. My other friend poked the idea that my third eye opened, so that's why I was able to see them. I don't know, but all I know is what I saw and experienced was very real. I now believe Tucson is a real-life Halloween town. Not sure if this is paranormal. When I was 8 or 9, my mom and I went out one evening to buy groceries. There were a lot of chain snatchings happening at the time. My mom realized she had forgotten to take off her gold chain, and she pointed at it, saying, "Should we go back home to keep it?" Dilemma. It was a big, noticeable one, and we were quite far from home, so she wrapped her chiffon scarf around her neck to hide it. It was layers of scarf and proper struggle for a chain snatcher to reach through to snatch the chain now. We did our errands, but on the way back, she noticed the chain was gone. She had an absolute mental breakdown since it was expensive and our family had saved a lot to buy it. We thought it must have fallen through her shirt, as there was no way the chain was snatched. She called my dad crying, while I went to the bathroom for a wee. I found her chain hanging by the shower tap, unharmed. We were scared and thankful at the same time. Absolute confusion. We had no idea how it got there. I still think about it and wonder what happened. When I was 7 or 8, I finally got permission to stay home alone. I was so excited, but really just sat in the living room with the TV turned off, since I was and have never been much of a TV watcher. We had a long hallway where all the bedrooms were, and suddenly I hear the metal drop ring handles on my parents' larger dresser start clacking as if someone was lifting them and just dropping them, so they banged on the drawer. The whole dresser was solid wood, so the sounds it was making were heavy thuds. I managed to build up the courage to go look and slowly walk down the hallway, and as I got close to the door to my parents' room, the noise stopped. When I checked, everything was fine, and I went back to my chair because I was frightened and wasn't sure what else to do. When I sat down again, the noise started and kept going. I got so scared I hid behind the chair, which was in a corner, and just sat there until my family got home. That particular event never happened again as long as I lived in that house, but there were plenty of times that I saw shadows moving and other happenings in that house. And I wasn't the only one, because my parents, who are evangelical Christians, got our whole family together and tried praying out evil spirits from our home. I don't know what the rest of my family experienced, but I'm glad I don't live there anymore. Not too sure if this counts as paranormal, but definitely a few things that have been following me since I lived in this one apartment. When I was younger, I would constantly hear really loud footsteps outside right my door in the middle of the night. I lived with my mom only in a small apartment, and my bedroom was extremely far from the apartment floor hallway. Every time I would hear them, I would go outside and see my mom sleeping in her room. One night, in that same apartment, I woke up in the middle of the night sitting up, but my hands behind my back holding me up. My arms hurt so much that I must have been in that position for a bit. Scared the absolute crap out of me, and I couldn't sleep alone for years after. Now I sometimes fall asleep but wake up extremely quickly with the insane need to start running out of bed, which now scares the crap out of my husband, because I'm literally bolting out of bed for no reason. One time he was coming to bed and I sat up and started screaming, like a blood-curdling scream, but I have no recollection from it. I just remember waking up with my husband being terrified. I was 2 when we just moved into our new house. It was an old house built in 1712. Technically it was built by the British because it was before the American Revolution. Anyway, one day my mom came to check on me while I was supposed to be taking a nap but instead found me playing. She asked me what I was doing and I told her I was playing with a little friend. She didn't think too much about it, but then the second day when it happened again she asked me about my little friend. I went on to describe in detail a young boy with long curly hair and revolutionary clothing. Keep in mind at 2 years old there is no way I could have known what any of that was. There were all kinds of stories about my house being a toll house back during revolutionary times, and the church not too far away had been used as a hospital during the war. There is a painting of George Washington at the church hanging in one of the halls there too. Anyway, my mom was thoroughly freaked out because she had been having dreams about revolutionary soldiers standing next to her bed ever since we moved in, so apparently that was it for her. She told me I was to tell my little friend that I'm supposed to be taking a nap and I wasn't allowed to play anymore. She called just about every kind of priest, pastor, and shaman she could find to come over and get the house blessed/cleansed. I did what my mom took me to, and as far as I know I never saw that little boy again. I was in my bedroom at night falling asleep and I kept thinking I heard people whispering. This was over the span of about 3 months. I'm a scientist by training, so I kept trying to figure out what I was hearing. I live in an area where all of the houses were built before 1920, so when I told my crunchy friend about it, she insisted there were ghosts. After a while I was like, and maybe she's right? Who knows, lol, I hadn't found an alternative theory. That spring I hired someone to clean out the gutters, and he realized that the gutter had become unattached from the house, likely during a winter storm. The gutter was right next to my bedroom window, and when I stopped to listen outside, I realized I'd been hearing the wind whipping through the hole. During the day there was too much other background noise to pick it up unless you were right under it and listening while it was windy. Gutter guy fixed it right up and all noise stopped. Worked night shifts at this store because of too many break-ins. We let out the last cashier, then cleared the building. All clear, so we are at the back chilling watching Jersey Shore on my coworker's phone. Then we start to hear about 3 people walking on the other side coming to us. We both look at each other because we both are hearing footsteps of 3 people walking around, but we knew the store was empty. We hear nothing 10 seconds, and so we rushed to where we heard the footsteps. Nobody was around. We then split and cleared the store and checking out all the doors, but they were locked. Other time I was working alone and I had to check the very back corner door and heard footsteps behind the wall. But on the other side was the long freezer, kind of creepy hearing footsteps following you around inside a freezer. On the other side I heard rustling in the corner, but there was nobody there. The cashier heard the ruckus and went to go check, and I just said it was me to prevent her from getting freaked out. I've also had boxes thrown at me at the back all alone. It was the summer of 1994 and my brother and I both had paper rounds during the holidays. I was 16 and he was 14 and MTV was huge in our lives. It was on all day. We used to leave the house at 6:30 a.m. and get back around 7:30 once we had done the delivery. Usually this meant going back to sleep until about 11 a.m. That summer my best friend's brother was killed in a car accident aged 18, and it really shocked everyone, and we spent most of the holidays dealing with grief instead of chilling and doing what kids do during summer. About a month after he died, I had a dream about being at his wake with the deceased himself at a local pub. I remember very clearly asking him, "What is heaven like?" in the dream, and he responded, "It's good. It's a lot of hard work, but we have all the best people working towards something now." I then woke up and I can hear the old All For One song, I swear, on the TV downstairs. Later that day I walk into the kitchen and my younger brother is talking to my mom and describing in the same detail the dream I had earlier that day with the same question and location. And I'll never forget, he ends his conversation with my mom by saying "And I woke up and that I swear song was playing on the TV." I had a dream talk with my grandmother after she passed. My grandma was not one to give out compliments. She knew what she wanted and she was determined to get it even if it made others cry. She could be stern, but underneath her rough exterior she loved hard. I can think of 2 conversations we had while she was alive where she complimented my sister and I. This dream was different from any other dream I've had. I was walking through a corridor with lots of different doors and offset rooms. It was a place I could tell I wasn't supposed to be, or like I needed special permission to access. Not scary, just serious. I opened a random door, and it took me into a room with my grandma sitting in her recliner rocking and sitting like she was waiting for me. It had the end table and candy dish and lamp, but the room was not a room from her house and everything had fog around the edges. I stood in front of her, and she started with her usual stuff about what would make me a good wife and a prettier girl before she stopped and smiled at me and went on to tell me how proud she was of me and that I was going to be okay and I'm smart enough to figure it out. She apologized for not always being nice but said she was hard on us because we could take it, and she wanted to prepare us for the world and that she loved us, my sister and I. She stood up and gave me a big hug. I can still remember how she would squish me with her hugs and a slobbery kiss on the cheek before she sat back down and sent me back on my way. I know there are lots of explanations about why I dreamed her like that. I had been missing her terribly and felt guilty for not being able to go to her funeral, and for also had mixed feelings about how hard she was in us but how we could always feel her love even when she didn't express it. But this dream just made me feel so much lighter and at peace with her. I've never had another dream like it. I still miss her so much. Also sometimes when I'm cooking I hear her. She always did this. Oh ho, where she would purse her lips and shake her head with her hand out, talk to the hand fashion when we did things different to how she would / expected, and I hear it every time I lick the spoon while I'm cooking.